At number 237, Elm Street, behind facade of faded grandeur and suffocating silence, a life was unraveling, second by agonizing second. Inside this self-made prison, an unthinkable horror was quietly unfolding, not of violence, but of crushing loneliness and slow decay. Only one person, police officer Sarah Miller, felt the chilling undercurrent emanating from the house, a silent scream no one else seemed to hear. She couldn't shake the terrifying premonition that if she didn't act, if she didn't find a way to breach those walls, something precious would be extinguished just moments from salvation. This is a story of how her persistent compassion led her to discover a secret prison and pull someone back from the brink just in the nick of time. Officer Sarah Miller had patrolled these streets for a decade. The initial idealism of her early career had been tempered by the harsh realities of urban life, yet it hadn't extinguished the deep well of empathy that defined her. She'd learned that the most devastating emergencies weren't always heralded by sirens. Sometimes they whispered from behind closed doors in the suffocating silence of lives lived in the shadows. A particular case from her rookie years, a welfare check she'd almost dismissed too soon, still haunted her waking thoughts, a constant reminder to trust the quiet nudges of her intuition. That memory fueled a vigilance that set her apart, a determination to see what others overlooked. Her own life was one of quiet order. Her small apartment, a haven from the city's chaos, often felt too still after a long shift. In those solitary hours, sipping tea and watching the distant city lights, she'd often reflect on the fleeting encounters of her day, the invisible threads connecting disparate lives. This introspective nature made her an exceptional officer, acutely aware of the subtle currents of human emotion, but it also meant she carried the weight of unspoken sorrows. Number 237, Elm Street had become one such sorrow, a persistent thrum of unease on her daily route. The Victorian house, once clearly a place of pride, now seemed to cower behind a barricade of overgrown hedges and perpetually drawn lace curtains. Its windows, dusty and blank, stared out like the eyes of someone lost in a forgotten dream. Mail would often cram the rusted box by the gate, sometimes for days, before vanishing as mysteriously as it had accumulated. When Sarah had casually asked, neighbors painted a picture of an elderly woman, Mrs. Elara Vance. A recluse, they'd called her someone who had retreated from the world years ago. Vague mentions of a nephew surfaced, one who supposedly checked in, but his appearances were sporadic at best, more myth than reality. Sarah had only ever witnessed fleeting shadows moving behind those grimy curtains, a brief flicker of lamplight late at night. These were not actionable observations, nothing to warrant an official report. Yet, the house exuded a palpable sense of distress, a silent, urgent plea she couldn't quite decipher. Each time a patrol car passed, she felt a pull, a conviction that something vital was slipping away within those walls. Her normal life, her routine, was about to be irrevocably altered by the magnetic pull of that house and the desperate story it held captive. The disruption began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, unsettling clues that pricked at Sarah's conscience. A call about a loose dog further down Elm Street brought her close to number 237. As she helped a nervous animal control officer, her gaze kept returning to Mrs. Vance's silent, brooding facade. The mailbox was engorged with letters, a vibrant splash of color against the gray, weather with the porch, a clear signal of neglect. A week later, a minor collision at a nearby intersection drew her back. This time, as she directed traffic, a faint, sickly sweet odor, almost like overripe fruit mixed with something chemical, wafted from the direction of 237. It was elusive, quickly dissipated by the afternoon breeze, but it lodged itself in her memory, another disturbing piece of an incomplete puzzle. Her partner, Dave Haskins, a pragmatic officer who favored clear-cut cases, noticed her recurring glances towards the old Victorian. "Still got your eye on the spooky house, Miller?" He'd asked one quiet afternoon, a hint of friendly concern in his voice. Some folks just value their privacy to an extreme, you know? Probably nothing. Sarah had managed a non-committal nod. "Yeah, I know, Dave. It's just a feeling." "Feelings are tricky, Miller," he'd responded, not unkindly. "They need to be backed by something solid before we go knocking on doors without a clear reason." He wasn't wrong. Department policy was clear. But Sarah's intuition, sharpened by experience and the lingering sting of past regret, was insistent. The overflowing mailbox, the unsettling odor, the profound stillness. These were her reasons. Flimsy perhaps by official standards, but compelling to her. She decided then and there, on her next patrol, she would stop, she would make contact. The silent plea from number 237 had become too loud to ignore. This was a pivotal moment. The choice to step beyond the predictable path of her duties and into the uncertain terrain of proactive human concern. The following afternoon, under a sky-threatening rain, Sarah parked her cruiser a discreet distance from number 237. The air was heavy, amplifying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves as she unlatched the rusted gate. The flagstone path leading to the porch was cracked and uneven, nearly consumed by tenacious weeds. The house itself seemed to sigh around her, its silence more profound than any sound. She took a steadying breath and rapped her knuckles against the thick, paint-peeled wooden door. The sound was absorbed instantly, as if the house itself was trying to muffle her presence. She knocked again, a little louder. "Police!" she called out, her voice steady but carrying a note of gentle authority. "Just doing a welfare check. We notice your mail has been piling up, ma'am." Silence stretched, thick and unnerving. She strained her ears, listening for any sign of life, a footstep, a cough, the creak of a floorboard. Nothing. Was anyone even there? Or was the house truly as empty as it appeared? "Mrs. Vance!" Sarah tried again, her voice softer now, less official. "This is Officer Miller. Is everything all right in there?" A faint rustle, like dry leaves skittering across a floor. Then a voice, so thin and frail it sounded like antique parchment. "Go away." The words were barely a breath, laced with an undeniable tremor of fear. It wasn't anger in the voice, but a deep, weary defensiveness. "Mrs. Vance," Sarah continued, keeping her tone gentle, "I just want to make sure you're okay. It's going to storm soon. Are you all right? Do you need anything?" Another long, agonizing pause. Sarah imagined the woman on the other side, weighing fear against an unknown need. I am perfectly fine," the voice insisted, though the quaver betrayed the words. "Please, just leave me be." Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed that fine was a desperate lie. She could press the issue, cite her concerns, perhaps even try to find grounds for a forced entry, but that felt wrong. It would only solidify the fear, slam the door shut even tighter. She opted for a different approach, a softer key. This was the first offering, a gesture of non-threatening concern. "All right, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice imbued with warmth. "I won't disturb you any further today, but I'm going to leave my card here, tucked right into the doorframe. It has my direct line on it. If you find yourself needing anything at all, even if it's just to hear a friendly voice, please don't hesitate to call." She carefully slid her official business card, on which she'd scribbled her personal cell number, into the narrow gap between the door and its frame. "I patrol this area regularly. I just want you to know that someone is aware and someone cares." Walking back to her cruiser, a sense of frustration mingled with a nascent hope. It was a start, however small. The response had been one of fear, but perhaps she had planted a tiny seed of trust. As she glanced back, the lace curtains remained unmoving, but Sarah had an uncanny feeling that unseen eyes were watching her depart. The oppressive silence of number 237 no longer felt entirely vacant. It felt watchful. True to her word, Sarah made it a point to include Elm Street, specifically number 237, in every patrol. She didn't always stop, didn't always try to engage, but she always observed. The day after her first visit, she noted with a small surge of encouragement that the card she'd left was gone. Had Elara taken it, or had the wind merely carried it away? She couldn't be certain, but she chose to believe the former. The mailbox, however, remained a barometer of neglect, alternately overflowing and then mysteriously emptied in irregular cycles. One particularly humid afternoon, the air thick and still, Sarah felt that familiar prickle of unease intensify. She decided to try a more direct, yet still gentle, approach. She stopped at a small local bakery and bought a chilled bottle of water and a freshly baked scone, its aroma warm and comforting. At number 237, she knocked, announced herself, and waited. The same reedy voice, perhaps a fraction less brittle this time, responded, "I thought I made it clear. I am quite all right." "I know you did, Mrs. Vance," Sarah replied, her tone easy and conversational. "It's just an exceptionally hot day, and I was in the neighborhood. I worried you might not have anyone to bring you something cool. I picked up a cold bottle of water and a scone. I can just leave them on the porch for you, if you'd like. No need to open the door." The silence that followed was charged. Sarah could almost picture Elara on the other side, her hand hovering near the lock, battling suspicion against what must have been a gnawing loneliness or perhaps even a simple need. Finally, the voice, a mere whisper, "You can set it by the door." "Will do, ma'am," Sarah said, a genuine smile touching her lips. She carefully placed the bottle and the pastry in its paper bag on the worn wooden planks of the porch. "You take care of yourself in this heat. And please remember, my card is there if you need anything at all." She didn't linger. As she reached the sidewalk, she thought she heard the faintest click, as if a deadbolt was being drawn back, followed by the softest creak of the door opening just a sliver, then closing again with a quiet thud. It was progress. A tiny bridge of trust was being tentatively constructed, beam by fragile beam, across an abyss of isolation. This gentle ritual continued over the ensuing weeks. Sarah would stop by every few days. Sometimes she brought a small, thoughtful offering, a section of the newspaper she thought Elara might enjoy, a piece of ripe fruit, another bottle of water on a warm day. Other times, she simply stood on the porch for a few moments, offering a brief, one-sided conversation to the heavy door. She'd talk about the changing leaves, a funny anecdote from her shift, the robin building a nest in the oak tree down the street. She never pried, never demanded entry, never asked intrusive questions. She simply offered her presence, a steady, reassuring signal in profound silence that enveloped Elara Vance's world. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Elara's responses began to shift. The initial fearful go-away evolved into a hesitant "who is it?" And then, on rare occasion, a brief, factual reply to one of Sarah's gentle observations. "Yes, the autumn air is rather crisp today," or "No, thank you, officer, I have sufficient provisions." Sarah learned to listen with her heart as much as her ears, deciphering the unspoken emotions in the pauses, the quavers, the subtle inflections in Elara's voice. A portrait began to form in her mind, a woman of intelligence and former vitality, now profoundly isolated, perhaps too proud, too fearful, or too deeply mired in grief to seek help. No other visitors ever seemed to approach the house. The elusive nephew remained a ghost in the neighborhood narrative. One crisp October day, Sarah commented on the wild tangle of rose bushes in the front yard. Their thorny canes bare but for a few stubborn, frost-kissed leaves. "Those roses must have been truly magnificent in their prime, Mrs. Vance. I can imagine this garden was once a beautiful sight." A long, drawn-out silence followed. Then Elara's voice, husky with an emotion Sarah hadn't heard before, a profound, echoing sadness. "My husband, Arthur, he planted those roses the year we moved in, a lifetime ago." It was the most significant personal detail Elara had ever shared, a glimpse into the life that existed before the silence. Sarah's heart ached with sudden, sharp empathy. "I am certain they were stunning," she said softly. "He must have had a wonderful touch with them." The connection between them was still delicate, woven from these fleeting exchanges through layers of wood and fear. Yet Sarah found herself anticipating these brief, unusual encounters. She was investing a part of herself in this silent vigil, a quiet dedication that extended far beyond the parameters of her official duties. She noticed Dave, her partner, occasionally observing her with a mixture of bafflement and grudging respect when she'd pull over near Elm Street. He no longer questioned her, just offered a slight, understanding nod. He knew Sarah possessed a tenacity that, once engaged by her intuition, would not easily be dissuaded. The secret prison of Elara Vance was slowly revealing its true nature. It wasn't a place of physical bars and locks, but one constructed from the insidious bricks of grief, fear, pride, and crushing loneliness. The encroaching neglect was palpable even from the outside. The unthinkable horror wasn't a sudden violent act, but the slow, agonizing dimming of a human spirit, suffocating from a lack of connection, a lack of hope. A chilling sense of urgency began to grow within Sarah. She was making headway, yes, but was it enough? Was it fast enough? What if Elara's fragile, burgeoning trust was shattered by an unintentional misstep? What if a medical emergency occurred when Sarah wasn't there? The emotional stakes were escalating, not just for Elara, but for Sarah too, who felt an increasingly profound responsibility for this unseen, unheard woman. She sensed a turning point was imminent, a moment when the veil would finally, irrevocably be lifted. That turning point arrived with the biting wind and sleet of a grim late November afternoon. Sarah had endured a particularly challenging shift. A string of domestic disturbances, a frantic search for a missing child, later found safe thankfully, and the pervasive tension that always seemed to accompany the first real cold snap of the season. It was well past dark, her shift nearly over, when she found herself compelled to make one last detour down Elm Street. As she rounded the corner, a jolt of pure adrenaline shot through her, sharper and more terrifying than any previous unease. The front door of number 237, always so resolutely, defiantly shut, was ajar. Not just a crack this time, but open a good 6 inches, a dark, gaping maw on the otherwise sealed facade. In the context of Elara Vance's fiercely guarded privacy, it was as alarming as a siren. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the cruiser to a screeching halt, her mind instantly cataloging the dreadful possibilities. Had Elara finally succumbed to a medical crisis and tried to seek help? Had someone, perhaps the mythical nephew, finally come? Or, the most chilling thought, had someone with ill intent forced their way in? The wind whipped icy sleet into Sarah's face as she sprinted up the treacherous, leaf-strewn path. "Mrs. Vance?" she shouted, her voice cutting to the howl of the wind. "Elara? It's Officer Miller. Are you in there? Are you all right?" Only the mournful sigh of the wind through the eaves and the distant rattle of a loose shutter answered her. With her hand resting on her service weapon, Sarah pushed the door further open. "Police, announcing my presence. I'm coming in." The moment she crossed the threshold, the stench assaulted her, an overpowering miasma of stale air, decaying food, unwashed linens, and that sickly sweet, cloying odor she'd noticed before, now intensified to an almost unbearable degree. It was a smell of profound, desperate neglect. Her eyes struggled to pierce the oppressive gloom. The heavy lace curtain, so effective at veiling the interior from the outside world, now blocked almost all the weak gray daylight. The hallway was a treacherous landscape of teetering stacks of old newspapers, overflowing boxes, and what looked like years of unopened mail, forming dusty, hazardous drifts. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations. "Elara?" Sarah called again, her voice tight with apprehension. As she carefully navigated the cluttered passage, her flashlight beam cutting a swathe through the darkness. A moan, so faint it was almost lost in the groaning of the old house, guided her towards what she assumed was the living room. Pushing open a sticking door, the scene that confronted her stole the air from her lungs. The room was an abyss of chaos. Not the chaos of a violent struggle, but the heartbreaking detritus of a life that had slowly, inexorably collapsing on itself. Furniture was shrouded in grimy, dust-laden sheets. Every available surface was buried under mountains of debris. Books, old clothes, more stacks of paper, tarnished silverware. And there, amidst a scattering of yellowed photographs and overturned knickknacks, half hidden by a fallen lamp, lay Elara Vance. She was horrifyingly emaciated, her skin stretched parchment thin over sharp bones, her silver hair matted and fanned out around her head on the filthy floor. Her eyes were open but vacant, clouded with pain, confusion, and a terrifying despair. One leg was twisted beneath her at an impossible angle. She was clad in a threadbare, stained nightgown, and her breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper. "Oh, Elara, Mrs. Vance," Sarah breathed. Her professionalism wore a wave of profound sorrow and anger. Anger at a world that could let this happen. She rushed to Elara's side, immediately dropping to her knees. She gently felt for a pulse at the woman's neck. It was there, a thready, erratic flutter, but it was there. "Elara, can you hear me?" "It's Sarah. Officer Miller." "I'm here." Elara's eyelids flickered weakly. A tiny spark, a glimmer of recognition, or perhaps just returning consciousness, touched her dulled eyes. "So cold," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "Fell days ago." "I know, Elara, I know," Sarah said, her own voice thick with unshed tears. She was already on her radio, her words crisp and urgent as she requested an ambulance and backup, giving the address and a concise summary of the situation. "Help is on the way. We're going to get you warm. You're not alone anymore. I promise." This was the secret prison, stark and horrifyingly real. Not built of stone and steel, but of impenetrable grief that had festered into agoraphobia, of pride that had become a barricade against help, of an insidious societal invisibility that allowed a vibrant human being to fade into the background noise of life. The unthinkable horror was this: a woman, dying slowly, in silence and squalor, mere feet from a street where life went on, oblivious. If Sarah hadn't listened to that persistent whisper in her soul, if she hadn't pushed past the initial rebuffs, Elara Vance would have undoubtedly perished there, her passing as unremarked as her long, solitary suffering had been. The nephew, Sarah now knew with certainty, was a ghost of memory, a convenient fiction that absolved others of responsibility. As she waited for the paramedics, Sarah found a relatively clean section of a tattered quilt amidst the debris and gently draped it over Elara's shivering form. Her gaze swept the room, taking in a heartbreaking relic of a life once rich and full. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and silent beneath a shroud of dust and piled books, framed academic certificates and faded awards on the wall, obscured by grime and cobwebs, an elegant, silver-backed hairbrush lying amidst the clutter on a once beautiful vanity table. This wasn't just a case file. It was a human tragedy narrowly averted. The reveal was not a malicious captor, but the devastating power of unchecked isolation and the silent erosion of a human spirit. The weight of it, the sheer nick-of-time reality, settled onto Sarah, immense and sobering, yet intertwined with fierce, protective tenderness of a fragile woman whose life now lay, quite literally, in her hands. She had found her. She had not been too late. The approaching wail of the ambulance siren sliced through the oppressive gloom of number 237, a sound of hope in the desolate silence. Paramedics, their movements swift and practiced, took over Elara's immediate care, their professional demeanor a reassuring counterpoint to the heartbreaking chaos of the room. Sarah relayed what little she knew, her voice remarkably steady despite the emotional storm raging within her. As they gently transferred Elara to the stretcher, the old woman's eyes, still clouded with pain but now holding a fragile flicker of awareness, sought out Sarah's. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement of her lips, then a whisper, so faint Sarah had to lean in very close, her ear almost brushing Elara's cheek. You didn't forget me?" "No, Elara," Sarah said softly, her hand instinctively reaching out to briefly, gently squeeze Elara's cold, papery fingers. "I didn't forget. I told you I'd be looking out. You're going to be okay now." A single tear escaped the corner of Elara's eye, carving a clean path through the grime on her sunken cheek. It was a moment of profound, unspoken communion, a silent acknowledgement of a lifeline thrown into the deepest darkness and miraculously grasped. At the hospital, as doctors worked to stabilize Elara, diagnosing severe dehydration, advanced malnutrition, hypothermia, and a badly fractured hip from her fall several days prior, Sarah began the painstaking process of trying to unravel the threads of Elara's solitary existence. The house, a tomb of memories and neglect, yielded no clues to any living relatives. The mythical nephew remained just that. It became crushingly clear that Elara Vance had been navigating the treacherous waters of old age and grief entirely alone for many, many years, her world constricting until it was confined within those four decaying walls. Maria Ramirez, a compassionate and highly capable caseworker from Adult Protective Services, arrived, her expression a mixture of sadness and professional resolve as Sarah recounted the story of her persistent visits and eventual discovery. "This is an unfortunate reality, Officer Miller," Maria said, her voice gentle. "Far too many people, especially our elderly, slip through the cracks. They become invisible. If they don't have family advocating for them or a persistent friend." She trailed off, looking at Sarah with open admiration. You were that persistent friend, even when she didn't know she needed one. The days that followed turned into weeks. Elara's physical recovery was arduous but steady. Sarah became a regular visitor at the hospital and later the rehabilitation center, fitting in trips around her demanding shifts. She didn't come as Officer Miller anymore, but as Sarah. She brought small comforts, a soft, hand-knitted shawl her own grandmother had made, a collection of poetry by Mary Oliver she thought Elara might appreciate, or sometimes just a quiet, reassuring presence. Initially, Elara was withdrawn, her eyes still reflecting the shadows of her long confinement. But as her body began to heal, a spark of her former intellect and spirit slowly rekindled. One blustery afternoon, Sarah found Elara sitting up in her sunlit room, a book open in her lap, though her gaze was fixed on the swirling leaves outside the window. "Sarah," Elara said, her voice, though still frail, now possessed a newfound clarity. She turned from a window, a tentative smile gracing her lips. "Hello, Elara," Sarah responded warmly, pulling up a visitor's chair. "You look like you're feeling much brighter today." Elara's gaze held Sarah's. "The nurses, the doctors, they tell me you saved my life. That if you hadn't come, if you hadn't persisted." Her voice choked, and she paused to compose herself. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I was just doing my job, Elara, and I was worried. I'm so glad I could be there for you." "No," Elara said, shaking her head slightly, her eyes glistening. "It was more than a job. So many people, they must have seen the house. They must have wondered. But no one else truly saw. I had become a ghost in my own life, fading away. I thought I would simply vanish, unnoticed." "You are not a ghost, Elara," Sarah said, her voice firm but gentle. "You are very real, and you are not unnoticed. People do care." Elara reached out a trembling hand, and Sarah took it, her own hand strong and steady around Elara's delicate one. "You cared," Elara whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You kept coming back, even when I was sharp with you, even when I pushed you away. I was so afraid of everything, of the world outside, of anyone seeing how I was living, how I had let Arthur's home, our home, fall apart. Fear can be a powerful prison, Elara," Sarah said softly, "and loneliness its strongest wall. But you were brave enough to let a little light in, even if it was just a crack in the door at first." "My Arthur," Elara murmured, a nostalgic light entering her eyes. "He was such a vibrant man. When he died, it was as if all the color drained from my world. The house, it became my sanctuary, then my fortress, and finally my tomb. You, my dear Sarah, you didn't just find me after a fall. You found the key to unlock that tomb. You rescued me from being forgotten. You gave me back my life. A profound sense of peace and fulfillment washed over Sarah. This, right here, was a true reward. It wasn't about official commendations or public recognition. It was about this sacred moment of human connection, this life reclaimed from the precipice of despair, the weariness she so often carried, the shadows of past regrets, felt immeasurably lighter. She had trusted her instincts. She had chosen compassion over indifference. She had persisted in kindness. And it had mattered. It had mattered more than she could ever have articulated. The full realization of the positive change, not just for Elara, but within her own heart, was a deeply humbling and powerful affirmation. Elara Vance's journey back to the world was a quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of a second chance. With Sarah's unwavering support and Maria Ramirez's expert guidance, a comprehensive plan was set in motion. Number 237, Elm Street, her secret prison, was professionally cleared of debris and hazards. Volunteers from a local church and community outreach program, deeply moved by Elara's story, which Maria shared with Elara's full blessing to garner support, organized work parties. Over several months, they meticulously cleaned, repaired, and repainted, slowly coaxing the beauty back into the old Victorian. Sunlight, once a stranger, now streamed through sparkling, newly glazed windows, and the scent of fresh paint and lemon oil replaced the long-lingering odors of decay and neglect. Elara, meanwhile, flourished in the structured, caring environment of a highly rated rehabilitation facility. She diligently worked with physical therapists, slowly regaining her strength and mobility. More importantly, she rediscovered her connection to the world. She made friends with other residents, joined a book club, and began to share stories of her rich life with Arthur, her voice no longer reedy and fearful, but imbued with a gentle warmth and a quiet humor. Sarah remained a constant presence in Elara's life, their visits evolving from duty to genuine friendship. They would share cups of tea, discuss current events, or simply sit in comfortable silence, the bond forged in crisis deepening into a rare and precious camaraderie. When the time was right, Elara chose not to return to the grand, echoing house on Elm Street. It held too many sorrowful memories of her decline. Instead, with the proceeds from its sale, restored to its former charm, it attracted a young family who promised to fill it with laughter. Elara moved into a bright, cheerful apartment in an assisted living community. Her new home had a sunny balcony overlooking a meticulously tended rose garden, a poignant echo of Arthur's love. She soon had her own small collection of potted roses, their vibrant blooms a daily reminder of new beginnings. For Officer Sarah Miller, the experience was a profound affirmation. While she did receive a departmental commendation for her actions, the true reward was a quiet, unshakable knowledge that she had profoundly altered the course of a life, that her empathy had been a catalyst for healing and hope. The story of Elara Vance became a touchstone within her precinct, a quiet reminder of the immense impact of compassionate policing, of the critical importance of looking beyond the surface, of listening to the unheard whispers. Sarah found herself more attuned than ever to the subtle cues of distress in her community, her innate empathy now honed into her most effective tool. The intertwined story of Elara Vance and Officer Sarah Miller stands as a luminous beacon. It starkly illustrates how easily individuals, particularly the elderly and isolated, can become invisible, ensnared in prisons of their own grief or circumstance. Yet, it also powerfully illuminates the extraordinary, life-altering potential of one person's unwavering kindness, one person's courageous willingness to truly see, to persistently listen, and to act on the stirrings of their conscience. It underscores that empathy is not a passive emotion, but an active choice, a choice to connect, to intervene, to offer a hand, even when it's difficult, even when it's met with resistance. The unthinkable horror Elara faced was not the work of a tangible villain, but the slow, silent, insidious creep of profound isolation and crushing neglect. Her rescue was not a dramatic, forceful raid, but the result of the persistent, gentle knocking of a compassionate heart against a closed door. It is a profound testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are the quietest ones, the ones that simply whisper, "I see you. You are not alone." And in that simple, profound human recognition, in that courageous act of connection, lies the most enduring and uplifting hope for humanity.